Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining. My name is Rob Trewarthen. I'm the Director of Strategic Communications and Initiatives for the City of Mississauga, and I'll moderate this morning's media session. During this session, you'll have the opportunity to ask some questions and hear from our senior leaders about the city's proposed 2024 budget. Our panel includes Sherry Lichterman, our City Manager and Chief Administrative Officer, and Marissa Chu, our Director of Finance and Treasurer. I will call on each media outlet to ask one starting question as well as one follow-up question. After cycling through the first round of questions from all media outlets, there will be an opportunity to ask a final question at the end. I'm trying to keep this conversation moving smoothly and to make sure that we hear all of your questions and have as much discussion as possible. Before we get started, I'll invite our City Manager and Chief Administrative Officer, Sherry Lichterman, to say a few words. Over to you, Sherry.
Thanks, Rob. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us bright and early on this Monday morning. Marissa is going to give you an overview today of the presentation or of the budget. I just wanted to mention that this budget, although it's the first one under the new strong mayor powers and officially comes in under Mayor Crombie's strong mayor authority, that she really collaborated with staff on this, and this is very much a budget that incorporates the best recommendations of staff based on the city's priorities and previous endorsements of master plans and strategies. So I think we have a budget here that is reasonable in these times of high inflation, helps us achieve our climate change goals, support growth and the accelerated growth targets, but also certainly as we look to the future, we'll have some challenges as we continue to feel pressure on infrastructure and of course, again, trying to achieve our climate change targets. So with that, I'm happy to answer questions once we get through our overview, and I'll send it back to Rob.
Thanks very much, Sherry. I'll now turn it over to Marissa Chu, our Director of Finance and City Treasurer, who will share some more details about the 2024 budget. Over to you, Marissa.
Thank you, Rob, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning. So as Sherry mentioned, I will be providing a high-level overview of the city's 2024 budget, and we'll also leave time at the end of the presentation for questions. So the city's proposed 2024 to 2027 business plan and 2024 budget outlines how and where the city plans to allocate its resources to meet service expectations in the next 4 years, as well as the proposed budget and tax impacts in 2024. And our 2024 budget continues to focus on 4 corporate priorities, and they are to deliver the right services to our taxpayers, to maintain our city's infrastructure, and advance on the city's strategic vision, as well as to implement our cost containment strategies. So please note that there have been some changes to the budget timelines this year as a result of the Strong Mayor's Powers legislation. Under this new framework, the mayor is responsible for preparing and tabling the budget for council consideration. And under our mayor's direction, staff have published the 4-year business plan and 2024 budget on November 6th on the city's website, and staff will also be providing our budget overview and service area presentations at Budget Committee later on this morning, as well as tomorrow or Wednesday if more time is needed. And also similar to the prior years, the city will also be hosting a budget town hall meeting tomorrow evening at 7 p.m. And under this new process, council will have the opportunity to propose any budget amendments to the mayor's budget at the December 6th special council meeting. Then for up to 10 days after that, the mayor could choose to veto any of those proposed amendments, and then council has up to January 2nd or 15 days thereafter to vote to override the mayoral veto. And by achieving 2/3, or in our case, 8 out of 12 supporting votes. And at the end of this process, the resulting budget will be deemed adopted. So in this chart here, you'll see a graph on our revenue sources. More than half of the city's revenues come from our property taxes from our residents and commercial industrial properties. And property tax is our main source or main revenue tool for the city of Mississauga, as the Municipal Act does limit the available tools for municipalities to raise revenues. And around 22% comes from our user fees from our programs and services like recreation and transit, and about 8.7% comes from our provincial funding and other transfers. And the rest relates to other revenue sources such as our PILTs, payment in lieu of taxes, supplementary taxes, fines, interest, dividends, and other recoveries. And these two graphs here show the allocation of property taxes that the city collects, and we currently share our property tax revenues with the region of Peel and also the provincial government. So for every $1 in property tax that's collected, around 37 cents does come back to the city of Mississauga, around 46% go to the region, and roughly 17 cents goes to the government of Ontario to be redirected to public education. And the city is putting those 37 cents to good use by working to deliver good value for money for our taxpayers. And this is why we also look into user fees and other revenue sources to fund city activities. And you can see from this chart, overall, the city of Mississauga's property tax is competitive with other municipalities in Ontario. And we continue to strive towards a balance of affordability for our residents while ensuring sufficient funding to meet the city's needs. And this includes a renewal of the city's aging infrastructure and also meeting our growing service demands. And here, according to our September 2023's Consumer Price Index, the CPI reflects changes in our prices experienced by our consumers. And the CPI has increased about 4.2% this year as compared to last year's 6.5%. And the construction index is roughly 10.2% this year, and our energy index is roughly 5.4%. And so inflation is still continuing to impact our cost of construction as well as goods and services. And this is the reason why we had proposed continuation of the capital infrastructure levy to deal with these ongoing pressures and also to ensure we have sufficient funding to support our capital program and our state of good repair requirements. So while the city continues to advance on its strategic plan, it's also actively implementing our cost containment strategies to help offset these inflationary impacts. Okay, now I'm going to walk you through our budget changes for 2024. So last year, Council had approved a net operating budget of $636 million. And due to, as I've just mentioned, due to operating and labor cost increases, such as our economic adjustment to wages, our contract and licensing cost increases, and other increases, we are proposing an $18.2 million increase to offset those impacts and to maintain our existing service levels. We have also identified roughly $3.7 million in cost savings and efficiencies across our service areas. And we are also proposing a $3.1 million increase to fund new initiatives. And this is namely relating to My Way transit service needs as we support the return to our post-pandemic growth plan for transit. And we're recommending the continuation of the 3% capital infrastructure and debt repayment levy and also the 1% public safety fire program levy. And this public safety fire program levy was approved back in 2019, and it provides additional funding for our fire stations and other related staffing costs. And we had forecasted this 1% levy to continue until 2027. So this brings the total proposed budget increase to 6.3%, which represents a 2.3% increase on the residential tax bill and a 1.6% increase on the commercial and industrial tax bill. So on an average home with a $730,000 assessment value, this would translate to a tax bill increase of roughly $151 for the city's portion of the taxes. And the Regional Council is still currently deliberating on their budget, and the final tax increase will be added to the city's portion in calculating the total final tax impact. So in summary, the city's 2024 proposed operating budget is $679.5 million. And again, our operating budget is used towards keeping our programs, services, and facilities open and operating. Now on to new initiatives. So each year, the city carefully and systematically invests in new initiatives to advance on our strategic objectives. And there are 21 new initiatives being proposed for 2024. And 13 of these 21 are actually offset by our user fees or other revenues or funded by capital. And those 13 would have no impact on our tax rate. So you can learn more about these new initiatives listed by tuning into our service area presentations at our budget committee meetings scheduled this morning, tomorrow, or Wednesday. So as I had mentioned earlier, the 2024 budget does include a $3.7 million in budgeted efficiencies and cost savings that were identified. And around half of this relates to lower fuel consumption due to the switch to hybrid buses. And since 2009, the city has achieved close to 81 million in budgeted efficiencies and other cost savings. So now I'm going to hop into the 2024 capital budget, and the city's gross capital budget for 2024 is 531.3 million. So infrastructure continues to be one of the most expensive costs that's borne by municipalities, and the value of Mississauga's infrastructure is roughly $15.3 billion. While the city appreciates the federal and provincial infrastructure funding programs like ISIP or the Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program, this funding does not keep up with the increasing challenges that the city faces to keep the Mississauga's infrastructure in a state of good repair. And this is why the Canada Infrastructure and Debt Repayment Levy is critical to support the city's capital program and to address our 44 million projected 10-year state of good repair infrastructure gap. And you'll see on the left, the graph that show the breakdown of the capital budget by service area, and with transit, roads, parks, and forestry consuming a majority of the capital budget. And in terms of funding source, on the right-hand side, you'll see that roughly 47.6% of the budget in 2024 does come from our tax reserve funds and 17% from other subsidies, grants, and recoveries. And the rest comes from other types of reserve funds. And here are a few examples of our capital investments in 2024. So again, we're going to be going over some of these at the service area presentations later this morning. So for the 2024 budget, we have included the Bill 23 and Housing Pledge budget impacts, and staff have included placeholders for these impacts in our capital budget, and we have captured the costs that would be required for the accelerated growth. And once the city conducts further background studies in the next few years, we would be in a better position to validate those projected costs, and the changes in development charge revenues will also be subject to the city's ability to meet our committed housing targets. And Bill 23 provides additional residential exemptions to existing rental residential buildings and also exemptions for affordable housing units. And this adds to further revenue losses to our municipalities. And the current DC revenue loss to date from the Bill 23 amounts to roughly 1.7 million, and our previous forecast for the 10-year DC revenue loss resulting from Bill 23 is roughly 325 million. And as part of our climate change action plan, the city has been incorporating these strategies into our budget process for 2024 and beyond. And this includes converting our bus fleets to hybrid as they are being replaced, as well as adding additional charging stations to accommodate the increase in electric and hybrid buses. And we're also making LRT enhancements to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and moving towards net zero emissions as we conduct new fire stations or construct new fire station facilities that meet the city's corporate green building standards. Okay, so this concludes my presentation. And for more information, please do visit our website, mississauga.ca/budget, where you can download our detailed budget book. And please don't forget to tune into our budget committee this morning as well at 9:30. Back to you, Rob. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Marissa. That was a helpful overview. We're now going to take questions from our media partners. And so I think we'll start with Paige Peacock from The Pointer. Paige, over to you. One question and then a follow-up. Paige, are you there? Not sure we have Paige online at the moment, so why don't we go to Steve Cornwell from the Mississauga News. Steve?
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for holding this session. I appreciate it. Also apologize, I'm in a second cup, so there's some funny jazz music playing behind me here. But I first just wanted to ask about the increase to Myway transit hours. I understand there's a 4% increase, which is, I believe, around 50,000 new service hours. I think earlier this year, MyWay staff had indicated that the maximum they could kind of raise service hours within a year was around 6%. So I was just curious if that 6% number was entertained by city staff, and if it was, is there kind of a rationale around not kind of boosting MyWay up to 6% instead of the 4%, which is proposed here?
So maybe I'll speak to that, Steve. Thanks for your question. We certainly want to get back to our service growth for MyWay now that we've rebounded from the pandemic and we're really seeing ridership come back, and it's actually now above our 2019 ridership levels on many routes. The 4% was recommended because we felt that that was probably close to the maximum we could commit to in terms of onboarding and training new operators and the staff that support them, like mechanics, as well as getting the buses in place. And so, although there is a desire to grow transit even more, we kind of have a plan to do it in an orderly fashion over the next number of years because of some limitations on our ability to bring on the operators and the buses. But that's certainly something that I think will get asked in budget committee, and we'll dig into a little bit deeper with Jeff Wright and the MyWay team during the budget deliberations. Thanks, Steve.
Thanks, Steve. Did you have a follow-up?
Yeah, just on a different matter. Sure, you were already addressing it earlier, but this is the first strong mayor budget for the city. Were there, just curious if you could go into more details on what it was like kind of working through this process. Do you feel, or were there any instances where the mayor's office or the mayor herself kind of intervened on what city staff was proposing? Can you just provide some more details on how the process worked, please?
Sure. I mean, this was a unique situation because really I think the strong mayor powers came into effect, and we'd already been working on a staff budget, doing our normal process for a few months. I mean, really, we start working on the budget pretty much the day after the budget gets approved every year. So we were already well underway. We got some preliminary feedback from the mayor on key priorities, but really her intention was, for the most part, to mirror the strong processes we already had in place for years. We had an opportunity to brief her a couple of times over the last few months, and of course, before it was published. So a lot of support, in particular for transit. She'd been hearing a lot of feedback on that from the community, and really understanding the impacts relating to our housing, meeting our housing targets. So it was quite collaborative this time around, and I imagine with she's a mayor that's been in place for a number of years. She's quite familiar and has been involved in many of the priorities that we've committed to. I would imagine, with a newer mayor, if that were to come about, or in cities where the mayor is relatively new, that might be a situation where they might start to try to reflect some of their own priorities. But in this case, I think her priorities, were already very well established.
Thanks, Steve. We'll come back to you in a little bit. We'll go to Men Simran now from Y Media. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you for such an informative session. One question that I have is, Mississauga has been tasked with building 120,000 homes in the next decade. So what support is Mississauga getting from the province?
Well, thank you for the question. Support from the province is certainly something we've been advocating for if we are to meet this target of 120,000 new housing units over the next decade, which would be taking the housing targets that we have had for the next 30 years and compressing them into a 10-year period. So the biggest thing that we need as cities, because we don't actually build the houses, is support for funding the infrastructure that supports that growth. And so whether that is parks and green spaces, roads, transit, community facilities, we continue to need funding for infrastructure. And previously, we've spoken out quite quite loudly about the impact of Bill 23 and how that reduces development charges, which is one of our primary tools other than property taxes for funding infrastructure, especially growth-related infrastructure. So Bill 23 reduces those revenues, and we are currently working with the province as they do an audit of the city of Mississauga and other cities to assess the impacts of Bill 23. And they have made a commitment to make cities whole as long as we are hitting our housing targets. So we'll continue to work with the province, but the biggest need from the province is funding for infrastructure to match this growth.
Perfect.
Thank you, Sherry.
Thank you so much.
Do you have a follow-up question?
That's all for today. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Paige Peacock from The Pointer seems to be having technical difficulties, but she has sent in a question, so I'll read it now. How reliable are the projections in the budget for future years' spending when we have no idea what Mississauga's total infrastructure is going to look like when the dissolution of Peel occurs? How do you anticipate this will impact the infrastructure gap?
So I'll take that one too, if you don't mind, Marissa. Since I'm working away with the transition board on the dissolution of Peel and working through the plan for how this is going to transition over. So yes, it's our assumption that we will be taking on a lot of new infrastructure with the dissolution of Peel, but it is also our assumption and the working premise for the transition board that with new infrastructure and services, the existing budgets and reserves at the region of Peel would transfer over as well to the cities who are taking those on. So while there still is an infrastructure gap, whether you're at the region of Peel or at the city of Mississauga, we certainly anticipate that some funds and budget would come over to the city of Mississauga as we take on this new infrastructure. A lot of that is still being worked out and really will be under deliberation for the next year as we head towards that January 1st, 2025 dissolution date.
Excellent. Thank you, Sherry. Next up, we have Declan from Mississauga. Declan, go ahead.
Following up, and you may have, sorry, Sherry, you may have just partially answered my question just there, but still with the dissolution of Peel and specifically the transition team and what it's working on now, what type of information, key information, are you waiting on from the transition team that may impact the proposed tax hike, the budget, the coming budget? And if you are waiting on such key information, when do you anticipate receiving that information?
Thanks for the question. I would say we're not really waiting on information that relates to the 2024 budget. The budget you see before you is the budget that reflects our best plan for 2024. The impacts of the Region of Peel dissolution are really going to be felt in 2025. And that's really what we're working through right now with the transition board. So the 2025 budget will be an interesting one because I think we're going to, finalize details fairly late in the year next year, and probably, be pulling together and assessing the full budget that could reflect a lot of new services and funding sources and infrastructure challenges. Probably a lot closer to that January 1st date. So we're really looking to 2025 as the year that you see the Peel dissolution impacts.
Thanks, Sherry. Declan, did you have a follow-up?
Yes, please. Still with the Peel dissolution. Come 2025, I guess, and moving forward, I know the city is, trying to, I guess, get the word out there more effectively to residents that this Peel, the Mississauga going it alone is going to be better for them in a number of ways, including, on their tax bill. Even if there's a sort of a little bit of a surprise in 2025, i.e., a higher tax bill, can you maybe take 60 seconds or so and make the case now for why residents should feel, good moving forward as the city moves forward as an independent entity with respect to taxes?
Absolutely. Thanks for the opportunity. And I would say that I would mention that I spoke a couple of weeks ago at council and did a presentation on the work that we're doing on dissolution, and would certainly recommend that folks take a look at that and the report that was delivered to council. Dissolution of Peel is an opportunity for Mississauga and Brampton and Caledon to become single-tier cities and to really control the delivery of all of the services that a city delivers. And so while, transition is always going to be challenging, and in particular in a situation where you are breaking up a very large organization, the commitment is that services, first of all, will continue uninterrupted. And secondly, that we really take a look at how we can better integrate those services into the city. So right now, where it may be a little confusing of, who does what between the city and the region, where we can shift to one point of contact for residents and businesses, the opportunity to really better integrate some of the region's services, whether it's health or human services, into our existing city services, like community services, for example. Better leverage the facilities and the property that both municipalities own. We have a high demand, of course, for housing, affordable housing, shelter space, many other pieces of infrastructure needed to support the housing targets, really maximizing the property and the infrastructure that both, right now, two different bureaucracies are sort of shepherding and guiding. So ultimately, the transition is going to be challenging because it's a complex process, and there are always costs in the short term to a transition like this. But in the long term, it will be better overall and more efficient for the taxpayers.
Thanks very much, Sherry. All right, thank you, Declan. I'm going to go back through our list again to see if there's any final questions. I'll start with Steve from Mississauga News. Steve, do you have any final questions?
Yes, please. I was just wondering, I noticed that the city's capital road budget is proposed to increase a bit this year. In particular, this road rehabilitation number stood out to me. It looks like it's almost doubling or is doubling over the 2023 plan. Can you take me through why the city is kind of moving? It appears to be more aggressively towards road rehabilitation at this point.
Well, I guess I would say, for starters, that the roads service area will be doing a presentation either today or tomorrow, and certainly there's an opportunity to dig in a bit more and hear from them. I think you're looking in the capital budget, I assume, Steve?
Correct.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. And so, that would have been, the planning process to ensure, as our roads are aging, that we continue to upgrade them, maintain them to the service level that council has approved. But also, as we are doing these road projects now, we are taking on a more integrated approach, as you saw, for example, with Bloor Street, where we ensure that we're really looking at the full scope when we rehabilitate a road. So adding in protected bike lanes, ensuring that the sidewalks and the pedestrian areas are well separated and protected as well. And so these projects are of greater focus, number one, because we need to create more opportunities for safe, active transportation. And also for our climate change goals, but also as we're getting, to be more of an urban city and growing up instead of out, there really is a higher desire for walkability, ease of getting around. So certainly starting to invest in our roads simply because of their age, but also because we need to ensure that we are factoring in these other forms of getting around and making our community more walkable and bikeable.
Thanks, Sherry. Steve, did you have a final question?
Yeah, just you've been asked about this, Sherry, but on the Peel dissolution piece, I just wanted to kind of just put it maybe a bit more bluntly. At this moment in time, is city staff under the impression that there will be a savings to taxpayers once Mississauga is standalone, based on what the information we have?
Yeah, I think over the long term, there will be savings for taxpayers. And, until we kind of work through the full and final plan, it's hard to be more specific than that. But, in the detailed discussions that we have been in, it is clear that there's opportunity for efficiencies.
Thanks, Sherry, and thanks, Steve. We'll go down the list. I'll go back to Aman Simran from Y Media. Any final questions?
Thanks for that. Just one final question. I just want their take on this. 2.3% increase on the residential portion of tax bill, and then 4.5% property tax hike increase in utility bill. That's actually a deep hit to the pockets of people who are already grappling with high cost of living. So what would be your take on this?
So I think you're referencing once you add in the region of Peel impacts, those budget impacts to the city's
Yes.
2.3%. So you're right. Right now, that is a big number. And so both of these budgets are still just in the proposal phase, being deliberated on by the budget committees, both at the City of Mississauga and the region of Peel. So certainly, the region of Peel increase is significantly higher than the city's proposed increase, and I know our council is very focused on ensuring that is really looked at and evaluated. But what I would suggest to residents, if they have any questions or concerns, is that they can certainly reach out to their councillor, whether it's their region of Peel councillor or their city councillor, to provide feedback. You can watch the budget committee meetings at both levels of government, and you can also send in questions through both the city and the region's websites along with your feedback. So we've tried very hard to maintain our budget increase within a reasonable level, but understanding that inflation is very high and the city feels the same impacts of inflation as all of our residents and businesses do. So we'll continue to work through this and get feedback and direction from the mayor and the members of council, and ultimately they'll make the final decision on what that increase will look like, both at the region of Peel and the city.
Thanks, Sherry. Any further questions, Aman Simran?
Thank you for that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And last but not least, we'll go to Declan. Declan, do you have any follow-up questions?
Thanks again, everyone.
All right. Well, with that, I think I will let our two presenters get ready for Budget Committee and the presentations this morning. So thanks for your participation in today's session. Hopefully you'll tune into the Budget Committee that starts this morning at 9:30 a.m. If you have any further follow-up questions, as always, please send them to media@mississauga.ca. Thanks for your time and enjoy the rest of your day. Take care, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.